Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Past presidents, learned speakers, honorable panelists, regional committee members, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Adil Iqbal, and on behalf of the committee, I welcome you all to the seminar on fraud investigation organized by the Southern Regional Committee. We will formally commence with the recitation of the Holy Quran. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Kul wallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid, walam yulad, walam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Without wasting further time, I would like to invite on stage our first speaker for today. He is a partner at KPMG, Tasir Hadi & Co. and leads the forensics team. Please welcome Mr. Muhammad Talha.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, ICAP Regional Committee, for giving me this opportunity to finally be on the dais of Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan. I was wondering whether I should be an audit or a tax partner to be given this opportunity, but finally I made it to the dais, so this is for my first time. So I've given presentations on the other matters as well. So first of all, thanks for that. I managed to make certain formatting changes in my template of the presentation, but in brief, what I'll be covering today will have 5 sections which I'll be discussing today. Just to build up the seminar, what I thought it's important that I'll discuss firstly what we meant by fraud and misconduct. Secondly, then afterward I'll move into what is a fraud risk management framework, because fraud investigation is actually the third stage in any anti-fraud framework, because the fraud frameworks comprise of prevention, detection, and response to a fraud event. So investigation actually is in the response strategy. So I'll just give a brief overview of that aspect. Then I'll discuss what we meant by fraud investigations. What are the objectives of fraud investigations? And then what are the principles to be considered in the fraud investigation? Some of the elements which I'll touch base in that particular section of my presentation would be what differs a fraud investigation from a normal audit, because then in that case, normally what questions the fraud investigator is looking at during the course of investigation. Then we move on to certain concept and certain challenges once you are doing an investigation, that what should be the mandate of the forensic investigator or a fraud investigator in terms of investigating an event. And finally, I'll just touch base on one of the elements which I've been presenting over the past 1 year regarding evidence gathering in a digital crime scene. So first thing first, I'll just move into defining fraud and misconduct. Fraud and misconduct been defined in different legislations, but what is the language of fraud in general? It includes theft, unfairness, corruption, concealment, dishonesty, misrepresentation, omission, deception, criminality, bribery, manipulation, and finally, lies. Most of the investigation actually started from lies, and then you start investigating what is behind that lie. Now, if we move on to the definition of fraud, I thought of later taking legislation. What is actually being in the Oxford English Dictionary? Fraud is a criminal deception, a person or thing that is not what it pretends to be. Then what is misconduct? Is an unacceptable or improper behavior. We need to understand one important element. Fraud and misconduct should be considered as a combined word. You just cannot ignore both of them. You have to combine and consider them in totality. I can give you an example. Why we call it misconduct? Every organization has a code of conduct. Let's take an example. You don't have policies and procedures. You don't have a delegation of authority. You don't have job description, all right? And you don't have any policies and procedures. For that very reason, obviously, because of poor controls, a fraud event occurs and something happens. In a cross-examination in a court of law, the only defense available in the absence of all these policies and procedures, job description, is the company's code of conduct. And that is one of the documents which should is the last line of defense available for any investigator. So that's why you need to combine them together and consider them together once you are doing a fraud investigation. So don't ignore that code of conduct document whenever you are conducting an investigation. Now, a legal definition of fraud, the legal definition of fraud varies from country to country, but as I highlighted earlier, it included deception, dishonesty, obtaining undue benefit, avoiding an obligation, causing a loss to another party, and so on. Now the question arises, why people commit fraud? There has to be an opportunity for them to commit a fraud. When we say opportunity, it's poor controls, poor governance, lack of segregation of duties. Then, all right, a fraud is being committed. What else? There must be a pressure on an individual, maybe personal or business related. Business related could be the supervisor always asks in terms of having numbers, build up the sales, I just want profits and all that. And then the second element could be that he may have his personal issues, personal debt issues, illness. That could be another reason which could fall under pressure to commit a fraud. But whenever everything happens, everyone, a suspect, would rationalize why he has committed the fraud. So in a fraud triangle, the third element comes in picture when people rationalize the fraud. And how they rationalize it? Their answer could be, everyone does it, it's a very small amount, nobody cares, this is the cost of doing the business. Now, as I said earlier, fraud investigation is the third element in any framework. So I thought of like bringing a snapshot what we meant by fraud risk management framework. Imagine an organization fraud risk as an iceberg. The visible tip of the iceberg represents the fraud and misconduct that is identified, and the rest is hidden. So if I can show this thing in a diagram, what all organizations see is the fraud which have occurred. What we are not entrusted actually, and we are not putting most of our efforts, is what is lying beneath the iceberg. In order to come up to that picture, what lies beneath the iceberg, we need to have a proper fraud risk management framework. The key challenges for an organization is to develop a comprehensive effort to understand various control framework, integrate risk assessment, code of conduct, and whistleblowing mechanism, and create a comprehensive anti-fraud framework which would have 3 stages or 3 strategies needs to be considered in that framework, and those strategies are prevention, detection, and response strategies to mitigate the risk of fraud. I think it's a bit blurred, but when I say prevention strategies, you really need to have a code of conduct. You have to conduct fraud risk assessments. You need to have employee fraud awareness programs, and so on. And you need to conduct fraud awareness training. That's what one of the elements here is. When we say detection, the detection means how you can detect a fraud. A fraud can be detected through a whistleblowing mechanism. I think most of the organizations do have that element. But an audit and monitoring aspects are there. But where the organizations are lacking is in terms of doing proactive data analytics, in terms of identifying any key trends, as well as one of the concepts which I'll discuss later on as the final stage of my presentation would be the use of forensic technology to detect fraud elements, as well as to investigate that. So we are done with prevention, we are done with detection, now we are coming to the response side. So where we are today, that is fraud investigations. So in the detection part, in the response part, you really need to have a fraud response plan, how to secure evidence, and then everything gets linked to the fraud investigation methodology, which my friend Zishan will discuss in detail in the later part of the session. But I thought of like bringing you in picture that why we are here in terms and why we are talking fraud investigation. We are talking the third element of a fraud cycle or a fraud framework. Now, moving on to the key concepts. Is objective of any audit, objective of any work. What is the objectives of an investigation? Investigations are conducted to determine the facts with integrity and fairness. An important additional objective is what we can learn from the facts and circumstances. There could be internal investigations, which you guys may be doing in your organizations. They are done with two key aspects. Either there is a regulatory requirement, or you want to proceed with a disciplinary action against an individual. In my experience, working from the other side of the table as consultants, most of the cases where we are hired by organizations to conduct an investigation, they normally hire us because they want to take either civil or criminal proceedings against individuals. If that is the case, and even if that applies in your organization, a legal consultation should be made. From my experience in working in this market, and I think you guys can also relate, that legal department, whether may it be an internal legal counsel or an external legal counsel, we normally involve them after we complete our investigation. So my experience, if they get onboarded earlier, I think that saves a lot of time in terms of conducting an investigation. So what are the principles? I think being auditors, being accountants, we all are aware of certain principles which might simply apply in investigations as well. We need to maintain confidentiality. We need to conduct it in a professional manner. We need to have competency to do that. If you don't understand the difference, what is evidence, what is not an evidence, you will not be able to conduct it properly. If you don't have the expertise to conduct interviews of the suspect or witness, you will not be able to complete an investigation. Then you need to be independent. You need to have objectivity. And one of the important elements is the protection. Protection of the whistleblower. Protection of the individuals who are actually giving you information. And last but not the least, it has to be carried in a timely manner. You cannot be doing investigation for ages. And that's where I will discuss 4 aspects. From the timeline perspective, what are the key categories of investigation? Irrespective of whatever category, whatever mandate, what you'll get of doing a fraud investigation, just keep in mind what differs a fraud investigator from a normal auditor is the questioning style and the questioning manner in which the fraud investigator obtains the information during the course of investigation. May it be collection of documents, may it be interviewing individual, may it be interviewing a suspect or a witness, or preparing the report, or going into the cross-examination. If he is unable to answer 5 key elements, what we call normally 5 W's and H, will not be able to do that. So what is that all about? That's what we call funnel approach. Questioning and investigation has to be done in a funnel approach. So firstly, you need to ask open question: who, what, when, where, how, why. I'll go into the detail in my next slides, what I meant by that. Then you have to ask probing questions. Tell me more about. What exactly do you mean by? Tell me in detail. Then you move to another level in the funnel. Then you reflect the understanding what you have gained from the individual from whom you are obtaining the information. So what you are saying, am I right in my understanding? Or am I right in my thinking? Then you ask a checking question where you say, is there anything else? And then finally, are you sure there is not any more information which you are going to provide me? It seems to be a lengthy process, but if you have documented it properly, when you are conducting it, it's not difficult. It's not at all difficult. But it will complete the loophole once you are writing the report. So what I mean by 5 W's and H. So if you are asking any individual a question, you could ask, who has the knowledge of this transaction? What does this document mean? When does this transaction occur? Where did the proceeds of the transactions go? Why was the transaction done? And then lastly, how is the transaction covered up? So if I have to put that funnel into operation in an investigation, it would look like this. You're collecting a document, you're reviewing a system, you're checking authorization, and what we all miss, we don't ask a question if there is an exception, if this system is not working, if the invoice is not being generated by the Oracle system, What is the exceptional reporting process in your organization? This is where all these fake invoicing and all these system works. So if you're asking, describe to me in detail about the process of an expense, then it has to be linked from one stage to the other, and you have to follow a 5W&H approach in terms of tell me in detail what do you mean by this document, who prepares the document, and then use the probing question, come to the closing question, and then finalize. Same, and then link it to the system. Tell me in detail how the system is operated, and then you apply the same questionnaire. Then you link it again, who authorizes it, that transaction. Then you link it to the exception. But whatever stage of an investigation you are, you have to build this funnel. What we normally do as investigator, most of our information working papers are based on this funnel. So what I'm looking at in a spreadsheet, that once we are collecting the documentation, have we considered all these aspects? Once we have reviewed the system and performed a walkthrough, have we reviewed all these aspects? Once we have checked the authorization, have we done that? And one of the important elements which everyone should look at is how you process exceptions. Okay? All right? Let's move forward. As I told you, the timeliness is very important in an investigation. So what are the key challenges as far as the mandate of the fraud investigator is concerned? The fraud investigator is required to frame its mandate depending on the type and level of investigations required to be done. What is type 1? That's what we call activity investigation. Activity investigation is carried out where the investigator attempts to find the answer to the question, what happened? Let's move forward. Problem investigation. That is conducted where investigator is looking for an answer. How did it happen? Now, this is where everyone is interested in. The third and the most deep down exercise. Investigation to unearth hidden fraudulent act. That is conducted where the investigator is looking for an answer. Why did it happen? Plus, who did it? We all are in fraud investigators. We find one of the most difficult areas of doing an investigation that please give a recommendation in the report. Because we are very fond of seeing recommendations in the report. We are not expert of internal control, we are just investigators. So please be mindful of the fact, if the policies and procedures are not there, document this as a fact in the report. All the investigation reports goes wasted once you put a recommendation section in the cross-examination because of the weaknesses in the controls and procedures of the organization. That starts at the back of the reports. You write the facts properly, and if most of the people do insist to have a control recommendation memorandum, so prepare a separate memorandum for that. That's where the challenge lies. And then the fourth part here is that what we intend to do, and sometime being requested, and sometime the management is required, is what they call fraud risk assessment or a fraud scenario analysis, where the management requires or your company requires you to answer the question how to prevent it from happening. I'll just briefly touch base on each of these types. What are the key challenges? What are the key concepts in each of the investigations? And what are the key challenges? So if you are doing an activity investigation, these investigations are focused on the activities that may have been performed in an unacceptable manner. Examiners are looking for an activity in past event, and a proper reconstruction of sequence of events is required. The investigator concludes its finding whether or not the activities were unacceptable. What are the key challenges? Examiner tend to dig too many details in order to develop chronology of the events, which led to unacceptable activity. Now we move on to the second type, what we call problem investigation. What is the key concept here? They are focused on issues that must be solved. Examiners are looking for answers. When answers are found, the investigation is stopped. What is the key challenge? And this is one of the most difficult areas for an investigator. There is no room for investigation to pursue other tracks than those that are target at a predefined problem. They're not interested if you tell them this is another problem going on. No, just restrict to where I'm asking it. No, that individual is saying you look into that area as well. No, just restrict to what is your mandate. Don't move here and there. Now, the most critical one which we conduct, and in most of the cases, 80% of the investigations which we are conducting is on this area. When you conduct an investigation to unearth an hidden fraudulent act, they are focused on revealing something which is kept hidden. Examiner will choose their tactics for success in disclosure of possible misconduct and white-collar crime. The focus of investigation is to catch the offender rather than the offense, as was the case in level 1 and level 2. We just need an individual. Don't come up with the fraud scheme, what has happened, we know it, but who did it? I want responsible individual to take my disciplinary actions against. What are the key challenges here? Typically, the line of inquiries are against executives who may have abused their position for personal organization or organizational illegal gain. To identify all suspects and witnesses to gather evidence requires a lot of time. This is a more intensive investigation because suspicions and suspects should be handled in a responsible manner with respect to laws and regulations. Now, the fourth part, as I've explained earlier, is what we call fraud scenario analysis. The purpose of an analysis is to create something that is of value to the organization. The value to the organization may lie in modification, simplification, innovation, and other measures for future. The forensic auditors cover various processes and functions where either the fraud had happened in the past or risk of fraud is high. But what is the key challenge here? And I think this is one of the most difficult areas, the development of fraud risk scenarios for areas where there is no past history of fraud and misconduct. It's a clean area. Nothing has ever happened. We don't classify it in high risk area. So we face a lot of difficulty for organization to come up with a scenario in that particular area. So we have covered the concept. We know what fraud is, what is investigations, all about what are the type of investigations. Now, I'll just briefly touch base on one of the elements which I've been actually discussing over the past 1 year, which I explained at the start of my presentation, is in the current digital age, we really need to emphasize on electronic evidences which are required as part of the investigation. As I think Zishan will touch base in detail, I will not go into the detail of what we call evidences and all that, but the evidence is available in different forms. They can be you can have it from a physical search, you can have from a digital evidence recovery, you can have interviews, you can have corporate intelligence. But what I meant in an electronic evidence in a digital crime scene, the electronic evidence at this particular point in time resides in laptops, our mobile phones, and in our IT servers. Right now, everything is paperless. As investigator, you tend to find the traces of fraud in paper trail, which is hardly available. You really need to take help of the electronic evidence to come up with the case. In electronic evidence, there's a lot of investigation because these are the areas, because we all need to understand that all these laptops, mobile phones, where the companies have provided actually the company is the custodian of those operating systems which are provided to us, and they have all the authority to actually gain access to that information, and once they have to gain that access to that information, certain proper protocols needs to be followed once you intend to retrieve information from that particular system. And most importantly, the concept here is that once you delete a certain thing from your system, from your machine, it goes out of the system. It doesn't happen at all. And I'm not here to explain if you want to do that, how to do it. I know how to do it, but I'll not explain how to do it. But the fact of the matter is a lot of things reside in your system.